It's a grab bag. We don't really have an intro. We barely have a theme. We're just talking about whatever the heck we feel like. Bunch of games we played recently. One got put off till next time. And you can't stop us. Welcome to Music Arcade. Hello everyone, I'm Galen, the sound guy Firestone.
I'm Ranakel.
And my name is Eddie, and if you've listened to our last episode, you know that I am a filthy liar.
Oh, right, we have to start with retractions. I forgot this part.
Yes, I screwed up. So last episode was a bit more planned than this one, but not by that much. So I brought up the topic of the Mega Man games and how absurd their release in streaming platforms is. I got something wrong. Actually, there are more games available than I thought, but some games that I thought were available actually aren't. Capcom has been updating stuff on Spotify lately. So, here's the full retraction. The Mega Man X franchise is, in its entirety, on Spotify, except for spin-offs. The classic Mega Man games are there, except for 7, 8, 9, and 10 for some reason I don't understand. 0 and ZX are available, and the Battle Network series is available as well. Everything else is nowhere to be seen. Neither are the spin-offs, so, you know, I was 50% correct, I guess.
And as producer, this is something that we probably should have done. We should have done this research ahead of time. We thought we knew what we were talking about, and we dropped the ball as a group on doing the proper research, and I want to apologize for that because I do want to inform our viewers and inform our listeners, and we incorrectly informed you guys last week, so we're taking responsibility for that, apologizing profusely. We screwed this one up.
That is certainly something that I should have researched before bringing up the point in the heat of the discussion, but here we are with the correct information now.
Yes. Additionally, another minor topic that we didn't bring up, I mentioned that the Arknight soundtrack was on Apple Music. It is also on Spotify, but you have to know the actual kanji for it. It is not available in English.
Thankfully, some people have put it in playlists with the the English name Arknights. So if you search for Arknights, you might get those playlists, right? And from there, you can get the actual album. So it's bad, but not as bad as we made it seem.
Correct.
Sorry, guys.
Yep. So is that our list of retractions? Do we have anything else? That was kind of the whole first 15 minutes of that episode was kind of a mess, apparently.
I don't know. I don't have anything to take back because I never lie and I'm always correct.
I'm so looking forward to you having to make a retraction now that you've said that. So we'll see what happens down the road. And on that somber note, let's talk about today's stuff. We don't really have a theme. We've just been playing video games lately, and some of those games have good music, and some of those games have less good music, and we're going to be talking about all of that.
I basically started this episode lack of theme by saying, I heard that track, I need to talk about that track, we'll find a theme to make it work, or if not, we'll just not have a theme.
And we just decided to not have a theme, so let's go ahead and start with that. The World's Ends With You and its sequel.
Yep, The World's Ends With You and Neo The World Ends With You, because what even are simple naming conventions?
It's Square Enix. Since when do they do simple naming conventions?
Yeah, especially if we're talking about a game whose composer also worked on Kingdom Hearts, of all things. So, let's count our blessings.
I mean, not just... hang on, I want to actually step in and kind of retract you and your benefit here. Yes, well, he did do some supplementary stuff for Kingdom Hearts. Obviously, that's Yoko Shimomura's baby. That said, I mostly know Takaharu Ishimoto, the composer, from his work on Final Fantasy Type 0. Yes. As well as some supplementary tracks on the Dissidia games.
Yeah, but that's also... he also worked as a synth programmer for games like Legend of Mana and Front Mission 3, and started his work as a composer by working with Masayoshi Soken on World Fantasista, a football game. Sorry, a soccer game.
I was about to say, we're talking European football, right? Okay, good.
Yes.
Gotta clarify that for us dumb Americans who use different names for stuff.
It's called football here, so have a high five, Rana.
I aim to reach out. Also, it's named football as well, but it's written differently.
Yeah, here too, but yeah, anyway.
In any case, the world ends with you.
Right.
AKA the best game on the Nintendo DS. So,
I have only played the version on iOS, and only for about 5 minutes, so I can't really dispute that point.
alright. Now, before anyone is worried, because it is a recent release we're going to talk about, and I haven't played it yet. I'm waiting on the PC release, which should come in under a month and a half, if dare to be believed.
Oh, there's gonna be a PC release.
Yep, but only on the Epic Game Store.
That's fine.
Yeah,
Better than nothing.
exactly. I take that PC release gladly.
Once they put in the features that they kind of needed to put in, I got a lot more at peace with Epic Game Store.
Exactly. So, point being, I haven't played it. I have looked as little as possible out of it, so if I spoil you on the game, it is purely an accident because I am always correct, never wrong, and I piece the truth even on games I haven't played.
I
I'm
can
also very
hear
humble.
Galen's eyes rolling back.
Well, I can see them because I have the stream on.
I won't pretend otherwise. This running joke is going to end up face first into disaster. I'm looking forward to it. Please
It's
continue.
all a setup.
I know it is.
I was waiting on a bus, and since it came out recently, I did look into the game's OST briefly, just to give a short listen and see if it was the same style, if it was the same vibe, and if it was still very, 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 very good. The answer to all of those tracks is yes. And I only had one track as a sample because I wanted to keep some musical surprises for myself. But the soundtrack I listened to, the track I listened to in particular, is called Rockin Rockin. And I like it a lot. There's some pretty deep guitars, there's some strong shouts that go masculine shouts too that provide a bit of additional rhythm to it all, but at the same time, what I really like, and I know from what he's told me that Galen is going to disagree here, is that there's also the chill part when the keyboard comes up.
I don't...
And
Go on.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I don't mind the keyboard when it was soloing, but when it was actually part of the mix during the lyric segment, it really bothered me. It felt very tonally inconsistent with the rest of the song.
And I disagree because I think the tone of the track, in spite of the loud guitars, is chill all over. But it's not the usual kind of chill that would be just the keyboard with some accompaniment, going with kind of a lounge cafe theme.
Cool. So I just realized we're using two different meanings of tone when you said that.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that's very
I
possible.
mean tone in the technical definition, like the actual notes it's playing and the frequency ranges it encompasses do not mesh at all with the existing mix of the song and feel very out of place and blunt.
Oh, okay. I can accept that.
Yeah.
I don't see it myself, but I can see that could be a thing.
No, so this is a problem that I have with a lot of I don't want to say a lot of because they're one of my favorite bands. But I know Eddie and I have talked about this band with each other at length, but there's a band I listen to called Epica.
Oh boy.
And every once in a while, they'll do like a spoken word segment in their songs. But they always use like a completely different mix for the spoken word stuff than for anything else in the songs. And it always throws you out of the song as a result, or at least throws me out of the song as a result. This is a similar situation with these keyboards. They are very... they're very dry in the mix. They're very just... They pulse at you from the frequencies. They feel like they could have been maybe 3 or 6 dB less loud to try to mesh in with the rest of the blend a little better. Instead, they just come at you really in your face. And
Actually, I think one of the reasons why it bothers me less is that you have a better sound listening equipment. And since I have... the first time I listened to them, I barely noticed the keys at all because I used $20 earpieces.
Yeah, well, as I listened to it on $7,000 audio monitoring speakers, so yeah, that probably is a big difference.
Now, to talk about the other sense of tone...
Yes.
What I really like about this track and what it expresses is the way some people, including myself, and I believe Galen, and probably a fair amount of listeners, like to chill not just with the jazzy or lounge tunes, but sometimes to relax with some loud guitars and heavy sounds.
Yeah.
While keeping a relaxed feel to it all. And that fits, I believe, the kind of characters that the game probably has. Again, haven't played it, but it's very much a game that is steeped, and a series that is steeped in Japanese youth culture.
Yeah. Having seen speedruns of the first game and having heard the soundtrack, it definitely... I have to only the first game to compare it to, and only what I've seen the first game to compare it to. But
Same.
yeah, it seems to have that kind of... I hate comparing it to this because everyone compares it to this, but it's still that Persona realm of let's have these Japanese teenagers get superpowers and save the world.
Exactly, except this time the Japanese teenagers are designed by Nomura, and
Right.
it really feels like this game is his play park.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I'm very much into it. I'd rather him do the things he likes and he's good at, rather than try to half-heartedly force them into it.
Fair.
But there's another part of the OST that I could listen, because there's the original track, of which I only listened to one, which is Rockin Rockin. But there's also remixes of the first game's OST. And I'm very glad that I avoided saying the original's OST, because that would mean saying original twice in a row.
Nice. Was that one also composed by Takaharu Ishimoto?
Yes. He composed both of them. In fact, he left Square Enix in 2017 to act as a freelancer, but they left on good terms, and he returned for this soundtrack.
Square is
which I'm
doing
very
that.
happy about.
I mean, that's the same situation with Yoko Shimomura. She's also a freelancer now. That hasn't stopped Square from hiring her back every 4 seconds because she's amazing.
Yeah.
So that's been
It
a
is.
pretty ongoing pattern of Squares. Like, they don't keep in-house composers for very long and mostly just use that to forge relationships, which they then take advantage of in the freelance market.
Yeah. And that allows those composers to work on indies and everything like that.
Yeah.
So, overall, nothing I can complain about there, especially since we still get amazing soundtracks like this one.
Yeah.
And so the remixes of the originals aren't really reinventions in the classic remix sense of things, but the way they sound to me, and I don't know if it's an intent or if it's just because they are free from the limitation of the DS sound system, is that they sound like live versions in comparison.
I don't get that they sound like live versions, but they definitely sound like they were recorded on live instruments. It doesn't sound very MIDI. Now, that could just mean that Ishimoto has
too.
Yeah, that could just be that Ishimoto has a magnificent, like, sound sample library. I've heard that before. Like, I'm still not sure about some things that Soken has done.
I don't believe even Soken is sure of the things Soken have done.
I mean, yeah, like, there was one song that I believe it was actually, we talked about it in the Final Fantasy concert episode, but the original version of the song for the first Uniter, not Academia Uniter, what was the other one? No, that was Academia Uniter, because the second one was Anesis Uniter, whatever.
Anamnesis.
Yeah, sure. The first one. That had, like, some horn samples in there that I was, like, 100% sure had to be live horns. Because horn samples suck.
Yeah.
It is hard to sample horns. You cannot do it most of the time. So, it's entirely possible that sampling has just gotten that good. Instrument sampling has just gotten that good. But, yeah, it definitely felt like it was... In this case, it definitely felt like it was live instrumentation, which is, you know, we talked about, hey, we can record music now, is much more common, and I love it when they actually take the time and energy to do that.
Exactly. And overall, I don't know the context of where these tracks come back in as these live-ish versions. I'm going to call them that. But I'm excited for them. Especially since there are two notable exceptions in this part of the soundtrack. One is that Twister, which is a song from the original, is also there just the original version, because it's really, really good and really high-paced and kind of chaotic, but it makes sense given that it's one of the first tracks you hear when you play in the game, and at this point you don't know exactly what you're getting into, and they play off of that.
Right.
And the other exception is that they also remix an explicitly live version of one of the new soundtracks OST, which happens to be Rockin Rockin.
Oh, explicitly live, right on.
Yes. Like, it's not labeled as a neo mix like the others, it's just a live version.
Cool.
Complete with crowd noises and everything.
That's a neat idea.
Yes.
I really like that.
Yeah, because just look at the game's cover and tell me those kids don't go at concerts.
Oh, yeah.
I dare you.
Oh, yeah. Now you're making me miss concerts again.
It's a recurring theme.
It is! I miss concerts!
Now then, let's move on to the next topic, since I've covered most of I wanted, namely that The World Ends With You is very, very good, and that the new The World Ends With You soundtrack is very promising, and from the one track I listened to and the remix, it's also very, very good. Let's move on to some of Eddie's pick. Eddie, what do you have for us?
Oh boy. So, I've been playing a lot of stuff lately. And one of the songs that has, one of the games with the soundtrack that has stuck the most in my mind has been a little, suppose, indie title called Tainted, Grail, Conquest. And it needs a little bit of an introduction. It's sort of a side game to the actual game that they kickstarted, which is meant to be a big RPG thing.
Okay.
This game is a deck builder roguelike game.
Interesting.
And it's set in a very chaotic, dark fantasy thing, and you are basically a bunch of Vikings who got stuck in a weird part of England where fantasy crap is happening around you. And most of the soundtrack...
To bring a little nuance to the dark fantasy descriptor, it's not perceived a kind of dark fantasy a la Dark Souls, which is one of the most recognizable kind of aesthetic these days.
Right.
It's more a fake, corrupted Arthurian sort of.
Yeah, it's a mixture
face.
mixture of Arthurian legends with Viking aesthetics and the idea that something is corrupting those cultures or whatever.
Yes.
It's very weird, very bloody at times. And
Oh, yes.
most of the soundtrack comes actually from, I believe, he's also an independent artist. I believe he's also an independent artist. He goes by Danheim in his project. He's from Denmark, I believe. It's a solo project of neo-folk, Nordic Viking folk music. Anyway, it's
Neo-folk.
dark and strange.
The song
neo-folk.
you sent at me, I'm like, this is Viking techno, is what this is. This is basically EDM, but Viking.
Neo-folk is actually a genre. It's the idea of coming up with folk sounds, but with a sort of industrial music edge. It's an actual thing, the neo-folk or dark folk. Some people
And
call it.
from Galen's description, now I just want to listen to that track over the looped GIF of the mimetic techno Viking.
That would probably fit really well.
Probably.
But yeah, the soundtrack has a lot of the songs where it sounds a bit modern in its composition, but the instrumentation and singing is very Viking, for the lack of a better word, and it fits really well because your character in the game is from one of those groups of people who came from the Nordic lands to England. But it fits the whole thing. And
All of them? Because, I mean, I'm not sure, but I feel like some classes have different influence.
the archer ones kind of have a different.
Yes,
They
in
kinda,
particular,
yeah, they kind of feel sometimes. think
more
what-
Middle Eastern, I'd say.
Yeah, one of them feels a bit Middle Eastern. One of them feels a bit more English, I'd say. But generally speaking, most of the classes are very Nordic, and
And the soundscape
customization.
definitely is.
Oh yeah, Danheim is 100% just a Nordic dark folk artist. From what I understand, they actually just grabbed a lot of songs from him that were already out there, and he has one or two tracks that they actually commissioned for the game, but most of them have had already been released beforehand. But they fit really well as a game soundtrack. One in particular that I shared is called Reida. It plays in the combat sections. It's one of the many, I don't know how many, but one of the multiple combat songs in the game. And it fits really well the sort of chaotic
is it?
realm that you
I-
live.
I thought it was just for the boss fights, actually.
It might be. I'm not sure.
Because I distinctly remember having it during the Golem fight. You know, classic Arthurian monster Golem. You alright, Galen?
No, it's fine. It's funny.
Galen is dying over there a little bit.
It's fine. It's... Oh my god. The Golem is a Jewish legend, for crying out loud! I'm okay. We're done. Go on.
Why are you
Wasn't gonna
sweating?
say that.
Oh, I wasn't going to just skip over that. But yes, that's when I remember it. And given
You might
that
be right.
the boss fights can get pretty long, it really helped keep the intensity up. Because
I really
the
love how-
baseline, the baseline really feels like bloodstream pulsing.
Yeah, I really love how around halfway into the song, I I think it's supposed to be the chorus to the song. It just really picks up tempo and goes really, really fast. It keeps the same lyrics, same melody, but it goes really fast, and it's really cool to hear that kick in when you're in a fight. And I think you might be right. It might be just boss fights. Now that I think about it, there are other songs that are similarly fast-paced and manic that play in other combat sections. But I think you're right that this one is for not all boss encounters, but only 4 bosses.
And I'm glad we avoided another retraction.
That is why I said the word I think every single time. But it's been... this is a game that I play on and off when I'm kind of bored, to be honest.
It's really good for that.
It's really, really great for short bursts, and this song has really stuck in my mind. And on the other hand, I've been playing another game, a AAA game. You might have heard of it, called Marvel's Avengers. I cannot remember a single song from that soundtrack other than the licensed tracks.
Yeah, you posted the one, and I'm like, this just sounds like Star Trek VI's theme, but up-jumped.
This just sounds like every single movie soundtrack.
It does. It really does. And, yeah.
It does its job of making the characters feel heroic, but it's not memorable. Like I told Galen earlier this week, the one memorable bit from the game related to music was when they were playing an Iron Maiden song, which was justifying the story as being Tony Stark listening to it within his helmet to pump himself up. But the actual soundtrack composed for the game, I don't remember a single track. And I shared one of them earlier today with you guys, and I still don't remember that one.
I barely remember it. I'm like, this has an arpeggio and it sounds like this other thing, and that's it. That's all I got. Now I just have Star Trek VI's theme running in my head in place of this song, so...
I mean, honestly, I'm almost tempted to say that it kind of fits, because first disclaimer, I actually kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
So do I.
As worrying as Disney's increasing grasp on the entirety of entertainment industry can be, as a film series, I appreciate those.
I fully agree. They make very good movies. They're using very good movies to take over the world, but they are making very, generally speaking, very good movies.
Yes, that's why it's so infuriating.
Exactly. I would actually make a serious argument that Captain America: The Winter Soldier would probably end up somewhere in my top 20 movies of all time.
It's a great spy thriller.
It really is.
I don't remember any single music piece from it either.
No, the music is completely unmemorable.
Yeah, the only music that's Marvel-related that I remember are the Marvel vs. Capcom soundtrack and one weird track from Marvel Puzzle Quest, of all things, which has no right to be as good as it was.
Fair enough.
And that I can't find anywhere anymore.
The only Marvel-related tracks that I can remember at all, Marvel-related at all, are from their cartoons in the 60s and then the 90s. That's it.
Fair.
Yeah, no,
like
the X-Men theme song. That's a pretty memorable one. Another one that I found memorable for all the wrong reasons, and it's not MCU, it's MCU adjacent, and that is the Deadpool 2 soundtrack, by virtue of having the first movie score with an explicit rating.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it was doing the usual Deadpool thing, so they had, like, the big fight sequence at the end, and in place of your normal, like, Latin chanting or whatever, they just went really explicit with the lyrics and dropped a bunch of F-bombs during it.
Okay.
But that's why I remember this, for being unnecessarily explicit and leaning into the usual Deadpool joke of we're just gonna make fun of movies.
Yeah, which kind of fits, honestly.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to check that soundtrack later.
I remember that one by virtue of how wrong it is, because you're not supposed to do that, but that's exactly why they did that, so...
Yeah, and when they want a film or a game soon with a memorable soundtrack, they do the Guardians of the Galaxy thing. They just buy a bunch of songs and put them in a mix.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, and that's... I would make the serious argument that's what they're known for. Like, yeah, they do licensed music. Their music supervisors have always been very good. They managed to introduce... I mean, the first Iron Man managed to introduce Black Sabbath to a modern audience. Like, good job.
Yeah.
I don't...
Incidentally, I think the game
And the
does
first
that as
Guardians
well.
of...
Yeah.
And the first Guardians of the Galaxy introduced David Hasselhoff's singing career to an audience.
It did, but I thought they used the Blue Sweet version of that song.
Oh, they did.
Okay, that's what I thought.
But that's less catchy a joke.
It
They
is.
did release a single for the second Guardians movie. There was David Hasselhoff singing Disco.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
But I mean,
Which
that's
is why I feel I'm allowed to make that joke.
fair enough. But yeah, that's kind of the point I'm trying to make, though. It's like, hey, they're good songs, they're licensed music. That's on brand.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So yeah, in that game, the Avengers video game is suitably in line and suitably unremarkable.
Yeah, that sounds right.
It also works that it's a game where you grind a lot if you're going for the end game stuff. So you just play whatever you prefer in the background and you forget about the soundtrack.
Yeah.
I don't want to say I'm okay with that, but I'm willing to tolerate that so long as it's not offensive. Like, if the music takes you out of the game, that's a problem, but if it's at least servicing it, then fine, whatever, I'll live.
It's serviceable, it's just not amazing,
Yeah.
I'd say. It
It's
does
not
its job.
detracting, so... It's not detracting. That's fine by me.
Yeah, pretty much. In any case, that's the lukewarm take we have on the Avengers soundtrack. It's a thing. It exists.
Is that a lukewarm take? I don't think that's an anything take. I think that's a completely neutral take.
I don't
Much
think
like the
anyone
music.
even talks about the soundtrack of that game.
Why
This
would they?
take is like water at body temperature and you slide your finger in and you don't feel the water at all.
That was weirdly specific.
Yeah, I was about to say, that is a heck of a reference is what that is.
It's fun.
So I don't
Moving
know how
on?
to move on from this, so go on, Galen.
Okay, so I've been mentioning this before, but I do this thing on my channel where I play subscriber specials, which is when someone gets enough channel points, and it is a ton of channel points, they can essentially make me play a video game. One of the games that was picked lately is a game called Lobotomy Corporation, an indie simulation game that's basically Fallout Shelter meets Cthulhu. From a...
Made by a Korean studio, I
yes,
believe.
by a Korean studio called Project Moon.
Plus a little bit of Kabbalah here and there.
Yes, it's very Kabbalic in its backstory and references. Very Kabbalic.
They did their work.
This soundtrack
Did
is
their
kind of a
research.
banger.
Yeah, I never listened to it before, and yeah, I'm into it.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the more gothic tracks in the album, let's say.
Yeah.
Somehow, for a game that has a very cutesy art style, for lack of a better term, the gothic atmosphere tracks were really, really good at their job.
There's actually
believe the word you're looking
there's
for
actually
is
an
anime.
in-universe reason for the cutesy art style. That's literally a perception filter on the main character's monitor. So
Oh,
they
boy.
look cutesy because they're supposed to look cutesy, but there are times where they don't look so cutesy.
That's generally a problem.
Yeah.
That's what I get for not being online on your streams.
Yeah. This game is actually really fun, and the music really sells out. Like, you have the main theme, this, like, neutral theme, which actually is really good, and if you have to listen to it for a really long time, because it's your primary simulation theme, the fact that it's good is a really good thing. Because
Yes.
you have to listen to it for a while. It's good that you have something good to listen to while you're listening to it, so... Like,
and then, from what I've heard from hearsay and rumor mill and the like, the game gets very intense for a simulation game, and the music gets really intense for a simulation game music.
boy, howdy does it. And that's not a rumor. I can absolutely confirm that. Yes, when the game decides to go hardcore, the music goes hardcore with it. And we will talk about that in a moment. But actually, when I mentioned the music, that actually brings up a point. So, a similar style of game, even if the gameplay isn't remotely alike, and especially not the tone, is a game Eddie and I both play called 2 Point Hospital. Actually, Rand, I think you play this one as well. We all play 2 Point Hospital at some point, yeah? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
That's a case where the neutral themes tend to be just so bland and just unpresent that I actually have started turning them off when I listen to a royalty-free synthwave radio station.
Which works surprisingly well.
It does. That's kind of one of the reasons I've stuck with it, is it actually feels like a lot, almost better than the actual soundtrack, which is very
Especially since you kept the radio segment.
Yes, I keep the radio announcers, which is great. Those are the best part of that soundtrack for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna have to ask for a link to that, because last time I tried playing the game, I kind of fell asleep because of the soundtrack.
Oh, yeah, I'll send you a link. It's called Night Ride FM. It's available on YouTube, but I stream it directly through VLC Player. They have a direct streaming option.
Not only the soundtrack is kind of inoffensive, but the tone, as in the tonality of the sounds used at this time, is kind of droning and deep bassy and kind of makes like a background buzz of sorts.
Yeah. So I actually kind of think of 2 Point Hospital soundtrack kind of negatively as a result of that. Like, if I get more out of it by turning it off and playing other music, that's a problem. I can't say I have that problem at all with Lobotomy Corporation. In fact, quite the opposite. I really like that main theme, and it keeps me engaged with the game and with the universe just as a result of being good and listenable while I'm doing all the simulation stuff.
Which is quite a feat.
And then things happen. So, as these Eldritch Abominations you're using for power sources, escape and cause problems, the music changes to actual, like, combat and boss themes. And one in particular stands out as a favorite of actually the guy who recommended it, but I've come to really like it myself. And that is what's known as the second warning or second trumpet theme. Man, this song is like the exact opposite. This is almost a Hirota-esque techno bomb that just hits you like, things are happening, get hyped.
When I first listened to it, and when I listened to it for the second time as well, the first part of the music reminded me of something and I couldn't put my finger on it, and I finally got it. It reminds me of a track from the Super Smash Bros. Brawl's Subspace Emissary mode.
Subspace Emissary, okay. I haven't played much of that, but okay.
Honestly, listening to that track, what came to my mind was the recent trailer for Metroid Dread, because it seems like a very sort of terror-inspired 2D game, but your enemies are technological versus the viral enemies from Metroid Fusion.
Right.
So that track I think would fit really well because of the more synthetic ambient that the trailer portrayed.
When it comes to things we see in this track, you have a 2D action game, I have a fighting game.
Yes.
That says something in itself.
Yep. It definitely doesn't feel like the kind of song that would be in a simulation game, but boy howdy am I glad it is. So, that said, as much as I love Second Trumpet and its energy, there is something about it that caught me immediately as an audio engineer. So, warning, I'm about to get kind of technical. This is going to be a lesson in professional, mixing. Yeah, I gotta flex the cred, because this is a thing that this one song did that I thought was real kind of awkward and weird. So,
go on.
Grab your notebooks, kids. This will be on the finals.
Yeah, it was on my final, actually.
Oh boy.
Yeah, no,
Fun times.
this was actually a thing. I'm even going to be talking about something that I mixed as in part of this conversation, and I've been planning this for a couple days now since we decided we were going to talk about this. Anyway, so
this is now documentary.
Yep. So second trumpet, while I was playing this on stream, I think it was like 4 or 5 days ago, I noticed something. And that is on OBS, my meter had flatlined. It was just stopped. And it was just there.
Huh.
Now, there's a specific term for this in audio. We call it brickwalling. And that is basically stopping the dynamic range from doing anything. Brickwalling compression. Compression is generally something I like to use a light touch on. Brickwalling is the opposite of that. It is a blunt instrument. It stops the highest peak and the lowest peak from being peaks. They just go plunk, everything's the same volume now, enjoy it.
Oh, I see.
Right. So, generally speaking, and do not take this as an official rule. Generally speaking, you want a dynamic range somewhere in the, 7 decibel range, give or take. That's usually good between the quietest part of the piece and the loudest part of the piece. What some producers will do, for better or worse, is just not do that. And just say, dynamic range is for losers! And just crank up the compression until everything is at the same volume, regardless of whether it's supposed to be quiet or loud. Peter Tagtrin, a heavy metal producer, does this a lot. And in fact, you can hear it on, I know, Eddie, you listen to Amorphous as well. Circle has this problem. He brickwalled the crap out of that one.
I used to listen to his solo project, Pain, and it's obvious. It's way too loud. Everything is way too loud.
It's part of his producing style. This was actually the big problem with the mixing of Metallica's album Death Magnetic. This brickwalling, this aggressive, clippy brickwalling, was the reason why people were like, you need to get the Guitar Hero versions because that's an earlier master and that sounds way better. Which is a really sad and weird situation for that album.
Yeah, that's weird to say.
Yeah.
Shoutouts to bringing up gaming music again, even if it's Guitar Hero.
Fair enough. I'm
it
mentioning
works.
these examples to give people who aren't necessarily familiar with it more mainstream and more recognizable examples of this technique of brickwalling. Now this is a production choice. It's not one I particularly like, but it is a production choice, and people have done it, and people continue to do it. It was done to this song, which I found to be very kind of odd because the rest of the soundtrack isn't like this. It makes me think, listening through it, that they used a piece of, it may be hardware, but I know primarily software, called a mastering compressor. And a mastering compressor basically is an auto brickwall button.
It is the brick wall.
It is the brick wall. It is basically a combination of your average brick wall compressor, which just hard stops your dynamic range, plus makeup gain, which just boosts everything else.
I like to think that every audio engineer has a cabinet with a glass. In case of emergency, break the glass, and there's a button just to brickwall things.
Well, you say that, but here's a fun fact about brickwall compressors. They're actually very useful for things that aren't music. I use a mastering compressor to mix this show every time we do it. So, it's actually extremely useful. And it's not even not useful in music. So, last year, I mixed an album for a Mario streamer who goes by GlitchCat7. And he had one song in there that had hi-hats that were just blown completely out of control. It was like, here's the dynamic range of the song, and here's your hi-hats. It was ridiculous. So I actually found myself using a mastering compressor there to get the hi-hats back under control, but I didn't boost the makeup gain so hard that it screwed up the rest of the song in the process. That was really just a version of, hardcore peak control.
For the benefit of our listeners, when Galen mentioned here's the hi-hats and here's where the switch is, He made a hand gesture where both hands were level at first, and then raised one beyond even the camera angle.
Yes, you're right. I forgot that this was an audio show for a second, which is funny considering who I am.
And what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The not-so-sound guy.
Yeah, okay, so now I need to explain that in a little more detail. Decibels are logarithmic, so every 3 decibels doubles the power of a sound. There was about a 15 decibel difference between the rest of the song and the hi-hat peaks.
Oh,
Jesus.
Yeah, so when I say they were utterly, completely blown out, I am not kidding. I needed to smack a compressor of epic proportions on there to get that back under control.
Store we had in front of where I live, they have since been bought by a bigger one, but they were called 0dB because I guess they thought the name Zero sounded cool, except 0 decibel sounds like they don't produce any sounds at all.
That would be correct. In fact, 0 decibels is kind of impossible in the natural world.
yes.
Pretty much.
That's like absolute zero. It just doesn't actually exist.
And getting
That has nothing
really
to do with the
quiet,
conversation, but you
Yeah.
talk about
getting
decibels.
in
I
really quiet
remembered.
places makes you dizzy and sick.
That
Yeah.
said, 0 dB is a thing in audio engineering, and that is what we call normalization. That's why when you're looking at an audio mixer like an OBS, like my mic is not set to a positive, it's set to -1. So 0 is a normalized sound. So if you're at 0, that could just mean you're normalized to whatever
Yes.
output you have. And that's a whole other conversation that I am not getting into right now. Back to brick walling.
Back to recording.
Mastering compressors are great, but they should not be used as a blunt instrument. And as much as I like the second trumpet song to Lobotomy Corporation, it is brickwalled like a ridiculous amount. It was completely flatlined on my OBS meter. Like, there was no dynamic range at all. I think there was like 1 dB of difference, which is nothing. That's mathematically like nothing. And it was just very surprising to me that was so brickwalled, especially since a lot of the other themes are not, including a later boss theme. So remember how I said the cutesy style was a perception filter? Well, at one point in the game, a perception filter on one of your allies turns off, and it is pretty grotesque, and that's a boss fight. And it plays a really cool individual boss music for that character that sounds really good and is really cool, but has like a 7 or 8 dB dynamic range.
Yeah, I mean, it's all in the name of the process, I believe.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I know with how much setup I brought up, you'll jump at the occasion too. But it's called dynamic range, and if you have the opposite on another track, well, you lose some dynamism.
Yeah.
And some range.
Yeah, exactly. Very brickwalled stuff has a tendency to sound very dead and lifeless no matter how heavy or hard it is. Just because there's no play in it. It's just, it's a constant droning.
Now I want to take one of my favorite tracks at random and see how it sounds like completely brickwalled.
I could totally do that for you if you want to experiment with that.
My guys will be in touch with your guy.
Sounds good.
I used to use a thing that Microsoft has on Windows in the audio options.
Mm-hmm.
In Portuguese, it calls it an equalizer.
They call it that in...
It's not really the traditional equalizer. It just... You set a level and it equalizes all sound to it, so it's basically brickwalling your output, I think.
Okay, in English we call that a normalizer.
Yeah, it might be that. Might be a normalizer, but that alone already really screwed up like 50% or more of the songs I listened to.
Yeah.
But I was a teenager, so I didn't know better.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah.
A lot of people don't actually know better until you put them in a position to do that. You know what really, as I mentioned earlier, you know what really benefits from being normalized? Dialogue. You know what doesn't? Music.
Yep, turns out singing and talking aren't the same thing.
Who would have thunk?
Yeah, I remember as a teenager, I loved it because it made things louder. And now I know that's bad.
Yeah, I mean, it can be.
When it's applied to everything, when
it's applied to everything, it's very rarely good.
It's like putting hot sauce on everything.
Yeah. Eventually,
Pretty
everything
much.
just starts to taste like hot sauce at that point. Like, it's all the same.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'd be interested to see if or now here's the other trick with the reason why I think this may not. This is probably just the mixer decided to apply a master compressor to this one song, or there's an alternate theory I have that may kind of lean into the whole amateur side of this, because this is an indie game. It's entirely possible that the composer had a resting brick wall, which is to say like a -1, so it just doesn't clip. And that's a technique I've used as well. And then just that particular song is just so frantic and crazy that everything would have clipped if not for a brick wall compressor blocking that from happening.
Ooh.
So, and I've definitely seen that before.
I'd imagine that might happen a lot in heavy metal.
It does. It does. I have heard distortion, like actual distortion, get through to the album mix on heavy metal tracks before. Like, usually you try to avoid that at all costs. You do not want volume. You do not want gain distortion. You do not want clipping. You just don't want it, because that sounds... It's crap. It's just crap noise on the channel for no reason. But if you put things into the machine too loud, you can't get it back out again. Like, there's just no way to fix that if you recorded it too loud to begin with. Okay. I have gone through all of this. I've talked about volume until I blew in the face. Let's talk about a completely different mixing technique, panning. And you know what is a really cool pan situation? A song that Eddie brought up from, what was it called? Kingdom Two Crowns?
Kingdom Two Crowns.
Yeah, that song
Also
is
known-
really cool mix.
Also known as the little game that somehow got a crossover with Bloodstained. I don't know how.
And then the Bloodstained part of the game had a crossover with Kingdoms 2, and that crossover took like 5 seconds to clear.
Oh yeah, the Bloodstained part was just, I think, a couple screens. The
Yes.
Kingdom Two Crowns part of the crossover was an entire expansion with new game mechanics and everything. But anyway, let's talk for a different podcast, not this one. We're talking about the music, and my god, the guys behind this soundtrack did a great job with the ambience in the game.
Oh, yeah.
So, I believe the main composer behind this game is a guy called Amos Roddy, but there's also an artist credited called Toy Tree. I'm not sure which one did what, but anyway, they did a great job with the ambience. And it should be noted that the base game has 2 different aesthetics to it that you can choose on boot up. You can create a new game with a sort of Western European medieval style where everything's like stone walls and castles and that sort of thing. Or you can go with what it calls Kingdom Shogun, which is a Japanese style. So
Shocking.
you have ninjas, you have samurai, that sort of thing. And with the expansion, there's a third type, which is the Deadlands, which is the Bloodstained aesthetics, and it even has a new soundtrack just to that expansion. But the base game alone, the guys basically had to make a sort of soundtrack to this game that captures the idea of the game, which is that it has a lot of depth to it, but it's very minimalist in its presentation. And the soundtrack does that. But they also had to do that for 2 different cultures, a more European style and a more Asian Japanese style.
Right.
and I think they just completely nailed it. It's great. It's very relaxing. There's some more bass-heavy tracks that play on occasion during an event called Blood Moon in the game, but generally speaking, the game goes for a more relaxing playstyle because at the end of the day, it's sort of a side-scroller tower defense game with some city building elements. It's hard to describe, but it has a very slow pace to it. Even Rana and I were talking about it earlier, and even speedruns of this thing take over 3 hours to finish. That is not something you see very often.
No.
Especially in a side-scrolling game.
That's a side-scroller? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically they did their best to remove as many UI elements as possible and to keep the game's presentation very understated yet artful. And I think the soundtrack matches that description to a T.
Yeah, it's minimalist, but you can feel that there was a lot of attention to detail, even if the graphics aren't very detailed. And the same can be said about the soundtrack. The soundtrack is very lo-fi in its instrumentation, but like Galen said, they use some techniques like panning to a great effect.
Now, when I first heard this song, it was like I heard the chimes coming from like all around me, which is great. I love it when they do that. That's just really making use of literally just two knobs. But making those two knobs work for you. And I love it when mixers and I love it when composers take advantage of such an easy tool. But so everybody just leaves things where they are and isn't willing to play around with it, which I think in this case really would have been a disservice to the song. That said, I almost call it a song lightly because it didn't strike me as particularly musical to me. It just felt like it felt like a soundscape, a very, very, very good soundscape. This isn't a complaint that I'm making right now. Please don't take it as one. But I couldn't really find a melody line. I couldn't really find a hook. It was mostly just notes. I didn't want to call it random because that's not the case. But you called it very atmospheric and you called it very ambient, and I think that's a very accurate phrasing for it. It's not musical in the traditional sense. It's very, as I said, I called it a soundscape, and I think as a soundscape, it uses soundscape tools very well. I really, just on a technical level, fell in love with the song immediately.
Yeah, like, it's even less about conventional music than something like... to give a more mainstream example, the Ocarina of Time Forest Temple, which is already very much a background tuned with a very understated, almost absent melody, and this goes way beyond that.
Yeah. To a fact where the idea
and to be fair, the Forest Temple music is also very good.
Yes. Again,
That's
none of these things that we're saying are
criticism.
complaints. This is literally just describing the music from a semi-factual level. It's still largely opinion, but it's opinion that I'm trying to be objective about.
Informed opinion.
Yes. No, I literally, like, the first 3 seconds of this piece of music, I literally perked up in my chair and went, "Oh, they're doing something really interesting with this."
Incidentally, the track Galen's talking about is called Kodama Sunset. I believe that's from the Shogun aesthetic.
With a name like that doesn't surprise me.
Yep, right. There are some tracks that are so minimalist that they are used for both cultures, but generally the European and the Japanese cultures use different tracks that kind of fit the aesthetic, but aren't necessarily deeply researched, let's say. But it works for the aesthetics of the game because the game also isn't historical. It just uses those aesthetics for its own purposes.
Right.
But yeah, every track I've heard, I enjoyed. Some obviously more than others, and a lot of them use panning really well. Sometimes it's just to give this sort of magical feeling. Sometimes it's just to build a melody in a more interesting way. But it's certainly a soundtrack that, at least to my ears, someone who's not an audio engineer, I felt like it was amazingly well produced, especially for an indie game.
This game is very good at making you feel like your defended city and the depths of the forest are two completely different atmospheres.
Which is great.
It makes you feel like you're also just watching the sunrise and the sunset at appropriate times as well. It gives that feeling of being there watching that thing happen.
And then you get your world bashed in by a switch critter.
Oh boy, tell me about it. I just lost a game the other day, basically. A spawner came along and destroyed like 3 walls and got in my city, in my town center. Literally in the town center. I had to restart that. There was no coming back from that one. But yeah, fun times. Great job for an indie game.
Now, it does set up in a pretty understated way Japanese atmosphere in the Japanese part of the game, or Japanese inspired, or while not relying on historic elements. But you know what doesn't do that and has no problems being kind of historic but not really, and definitely using the more traditional staples of Japanese music and instrumentation? Samurai Warriors 5.
I don't know, there's some flute in there. There's some Japanese flute in there. Not much, but it's there.
Nice segue.
Yeah, I said it is there. Yeah. And incidentally, the flute in question is called shakuhachi.
Thank you.
Which I researched in advance for this episode.
Nice.
Because I do my research.
Good job.
Now you're throwing me under the bus, thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I'm going back to a prior episode, but Warriors Orochi 4, another, thing, had a version of Ryu's theme which featured this instrument very well. So, sorry, Ryu Hayabusa, yes. Not Ryu from Street Fighter. Both have very good themes.
Yes.
Ryu Hayabusa from Ninja Gaiden is the one I'm talking about right now, and that uses this instrument a lot. So Rana and I have both been playing Samurai Warriors 5, and we've actually been co-oping on one mode, which has been really fun.
Yeah.
Apropos of nothing, and this may get cut, but I'm so happy Koei fixed their netcode. It's still not perfect, but we can actually play co-op. That's awesome.
Yes. The fact that it works on some level is better than most of the game.
Correct.
And shoutouts to improvement. The game has issues, a fair amount of them, and one might argue the OST is one of the issues.
The OST is so boring.
But I'm 30 hours in and I'm having fun.
Yes. It's not a perfect game, but it's a very good one, I think.
Yes.
The OST is a bit of an issue. It is so far the weakest part of the game. The music has been very much like how Eddie described the Avengers music, which is very generic and kind of uninteresting, and it's not offensive, except for one thing, which I will be ranting about momentarily.
Yeah,
two Galen rants in one episode.
Well, this one's gonna be not very technical. This was just a personal quibble.
Now, as an entry point, I feel it needs reminding that this is a musou. Which means that you're going to fight hordes and hordes of people, and you're going to accumulate thousands of kills on your average mission.
Yes.
So, in that context, the music, to be noticeable at all, needs to be suitably intense and distinct.
Yeah, and frankly, the various Warriors games have a long history of actually really good soundtracks. Dynasty Warriors.
Not only that, they even made a concerted effort to have their own identity that makes them specifically noticeable.
Yes.
In Dynasty Warriors, that's helped with a lot of heavy electric guitars.
Yeah, a lot of hard rock and metal influenced songs, with obviously other instruments. Oh yeah, Lubu's theme. Yeah, exactly. Whereas Samurai Warriors tends to take a more almost EDM route, tends to have a lot more synths.
Tons of synths.
Yeah. So they sound distinct from each other while still, still both getting your blood pumping and being intense enough to get you going. Item 1, Samurai Warriors 5 largely does away with this. Now it's going guitar heavy. And item 2, the guitar heavy...
guitar medium.
Yeah, guitar medium. Yeah, I guess that's a good point. And yeah, that's the other thing. It just doesn't do the blood pumping thing. It's okay, it's fine. But it doesn't get me into it. Dynasty Warriors 8 had a stellar soundtrack. Which combined a lot of these elements in every way.
It's pretty incredible that in the 8th-ish game of the series, they still managed to get some of the best mixes of music they've remixed for a while now.
Which, since we're talking about remixing, which the best songs in Samurai Warriors 5 are the ones they remixed from other games in the series. Unlike Dynasty Warriors, which tends to have like 1 or 2 songs they keep and then redoes the soundtrack more or less every game, Samurai Warriors has had kind of a consistent stage theme thing going on. Nagashino's theme has been roughly the same but remixed upon since the very first game. Same thing with Anegawa, same thing with Mikatagahara.
If you'll allow me to go on a deeper dive on this one.
Sure.
Good, so let's take the theme for the Battle of Mikatagahara.
Sure.
It returns in each installment. It's there from the first game to the last. And it's got a theme that's been remixed in every episode.
Right.
And one of the main distinctive features of that track in at least its first 4 iterations is the way there's 2 essentially main themes that play off each other. On one, you've got an almost trance-like tagline that wasn't that present in 1 actually, but starting on 2, it gets very much more established. And it's synths that go to boot 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 like that. And on the other end, checking my notes, that's the opposite. That was there for the first.
That was. I was like, wait, no, that's there.
Yes, but the flute, the shakuhachi, was only really started being there from Samurai Warriors 2.
Yeah, before I think in 1 it was more. I think it was still synth pad in 1. The melody line is still there, but it doesn't play as hard.
Yeah, and starting on 2 and from every installment after that, there's the flute that goes.
I just want to say we really need to work on that Ranakel beatboxing album.
I know, right? The point being that these 2 elements play off each other and have an intention behind them. Synth on one end, traditional instruments on the other. It's a clash of the eras.
Yeah.
It's a conflict. It's strong, it's distinct. It's not even fast-paced. It's one of the slowest tracks of the OST. But it's Mikatagahara. And then you have the Samurai Warriors 5 versions, plural, because they actually have 2 mixes, depending on which side of the conflict you're on. And the first one you have, on the Tokugawa side, they've pretty much done away with synth on 95% of the OST.
Sadly.
So instead you've just got guitars that aren't that intense, and that kind of... they're not even the one that do what was the synth tagline before. Instead, it's given to another traditional instrument, meaning that you have traditional instrument versus traditional instrument, and it just doesn't really work that way. You don't have the conflict, you just have something that's more homogeneous, and that's less noticeable. I will say, however, that the Takeda version of the track is much better at it. It starts outright great. It has a bit of a faster energy. There's the taiko drums in the background that makes things pumping. The two mic tagline are a bit stacked on top of each other, but it's overall pretty... it works. And then the electric guitar kicks in and kills the energy. And electric guitars shouldn't be allowed to kill the energy in any song.
I don't agree as much. I listened to the Takeda version more than I listened to the Tokugawa version, and I actually found myself... I don't want to say loving the song, because I think that's an overstatement, but I certainly don't have the same level of problem with it that you do. It was fine.
Yeah.
It was an acceptable mix. I didn't... yes, the guitar is kind of there, but it doesn't detract for me the same way it apparently did for you.
It detracts enough, starting at 30 seconds, to kind of make the rest of the song essentially playing catch-up for this part. I don't know, I'm probably focusing too much on that moment, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But,
I was just... And there is another bit of this that I think is kind of relevant, I was... just happy to hear the song in general. And now it's time for my rant, because this is just such a personal, annoying quibble. So we just mentioned we have these remix songs over and over again. Well, as I was playing the game, I got to one of the first major battles in one of the earlier games, which is the Battle of Okehazama. And it had, its own music, and it was fine. I just sort of shrugged at it. I was like, okay, well, it's a soft reboot of the series. They're going to go with some new music? Sure. I'm like, all right, fine. It's a soft reboot. I shouldn't expect the remixes. Then, as we were playing Citadel mode, I heard Nagashino. I'm like, wait a second, that's Nagashino. And then we got to Mikatagahara, and I'm like, that's clearly the Mikatagahara song. And then I got to Anegawa in the story, and I'm like, they're playing Anegawa. And then I had to kind of go back to my own brain. Where the heck was the music for Okehazama? Why did they pick that battle not to remix and they got all these other ones? What did I miss? I'm so annoyed and confused by this.
I don't really have, admittedly, Okehazama specifically in my head right now.
I think in part because there was a few different versions, which is it's kind of the rarity in that regard.
Yes.
In the first game, it was a pretty cool one. In the second game, they had to wait for Extreme Legends for it to show up, and then it was a completely different song. And then the third game, they used the Samurai Warriors Katana version, which was a remix of the first game, and then the fourth one had 3 different versions, including a version of the first game, but also a version of the second game. And then it gets even stupider when you include Warriors Energy. I almost feel like that's the one exception to the rule.
To say nothing of Samurai Warriors 4-2, which is also a thing.
Yeah, but 4 and 4-2 use the same song, except for the DLC version, which was the version of 1.
So, straightforward stuff.
Yeah, very straightforward. Most of the others have been very ongoing. Nagashino in general has always been the same kind of song, although that one finally became, I would consider it more of a real song as of Samurai Warriors 3, where it actually got that flute in there and got some more energy to it. But even that one made the cut. And for some reason, Okehazama did not. And that one just kind of annoys me, because I was expecting this big energy and it just never happened. Oh, and Warriors Energy 3 was hilarious. Warriors Energy 2 was hilarious, because at Okehazama it uses Samurai Warriors 2 Okehazama, but then at a completely different stage that had nothing to do with Okehazama, it used the first Okehazama music for no reason other than to have it in the game.
Yeah, and the weirdest part is that, judging by the thumbnails from my research, it's the battle that features prominently the character that had the biggest glow up in Samurai Warriors 5.
Oh, yeah. No, Okizama was the final battle against Yoshimoto Imagawa, who up until Samurai Warriors 5 has been played as a giant joke. In Samurai Warriors...
instead, he's just this menacing monster.
Yeah.
That somehow still isn't unlocked after you murder him.
Yeah, that's so weird. Like, we're way past where we should have unlocked him, and we've unlocked just about everyone else of his troops that should have been unlocked, and he's still nowhere to be found, and I really wonder why.
It's still not unlocked where I am, and I'm like 2 chapters and a half further.
Yeah, wow, 2 chapters and a half. You really went for it. So you're like in the middle of chapter 5 or so? 5 or 6?
No, that's just because there's the Akechi chapters.
Right.
So I'm at the end of chapter 4 twice.
Nice. Well, I just started one of the chapter 4s, I think.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie, as someone who doesn't play the game, I'm just lost. I'm nodding and smiling and going along.
I guess it boils down to they remixed every stage but one, and that one really needed a powerful mix. And it didn't get it. And I'm really annoyed.
And it would have been perfect to have something that just make a statement.
Yeah, and they really just didn't have that. As I mentioned before,
You could have said that as far as Imagawa was concerned, they really dropped the ball.
Boo! And for those of you who don't get the joke, prior to Samurai Warriors 5, where they actually made him a real character, Yoshimoto Imagawa used a freaking Kamari ball. He technically had a katana, but no, he was playing Kamari with everyone. And that was not only his weapon set, that was also most of his storyline, and it was stupid.
I think I was happier before I understood the joke.
Well, in Samurai Warriors 5, they actually made him a real enemy, a real threat, and they even had his own do not pursue Lu Bu moment, which is kind of your classic Dynasty Warriors moment of, this guy is probably too powerful for you to take on. Don't take him on right now.
Yeah, he's on the level of the way you encounter him in Neo 2, where he's a boss which summons a ghost elephant that brings the thunder on you and switches between 2 weapon sets mid-boss fight, which is something you can also do.
Yeah, so in this case, yes, Imagawa got to be much better of a character, and the fact that his, like, big battle stage doesn't, the fact that his big battle stage doesn't even have like a proper theme, when so many later stages of like somewhat, I don't even want to say middling importance, but like not as important, still has their like traditional music, just baffles me as a creative decision.
Especially for this game, which has a focus on 2 specific characters, and that's one of the battles that focuses on one of the main characters.
Yeah.
You could even say the main character of this game. So,
yeah.
I don't know. It's...
I just feel like this was a bad creative decision. I was totally fine with them going, like, just throwing the soundtrack out, soft reboot, new soundtrack, but then they brought the remixes in later, and I'm like, well, why didn't this battle of all things make the cut? It just annoys. It bugs me. It just annoys me. I won't pretend it's logical. I won't pretend it's technical. It just annoys me.
And it annoys me too. Think that's a good wrapping up point?
Yeah, I'm good with that. Do we have any like wrap up notes at all? Anything to talk about, or are we just gonna call it?
I think searching from wrap up notes is the best wrap up mention this episode could get.
Yeah, that sounds like us today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hope you liked this kind of freeformish, grab-baggish episode where they didn't really have a theme other than look what we're playing lately. Hey, we actually play video games, we don't just talk about them.
We swear we'll have a theme for next time.
Yes, we do. Have a good one, y'all. See you next time.
See ya.
See you next time.